Memphis Grizzlies big man Zach Edey gets surgery. The Grizzlies say the surgery was a success. And we have more details on what's next for him in the upcoming months. Plus, what about Jay Huff? We have not talked much about Jay Huff. He's still on this roster. He's another big man. What about this opportunity coming up for him? Let's talk about all that and more coming up here on Locked On.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. Thanking you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with us each and every single day. Shout out to the everydayers out there. Shout out to everyone that's tuning in with us through the offseason, as now content will start to ramp up in the coming weeks as we prep for the NBA draft, as we prep for immediately following the NBA Finals free agency, which will be a busy time for the Grizzlies because of the Jaren Jackson Jr. contract, because of, the Santi Aldama contract, and much more. So we got a lot to talk about in today's episode, because we got to talk about Zach Edey some more, as we mentioned in the opening. We're going to talk about Jay Huff as well. But today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Make sure you go take advantage of that over at Gametime. Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. As we mentioned in the opening, Zach Edey has kind of been the theme of our episodes and conversations of late. After we learned that he sprained his ankle again, we talked about it. I think he has had 4 ankle sprains since being with the Grizzlies, but the primary concern here has been the left ankle. So we're talking about at least three ankle sprains on that ankle, needing surgery. Zach Edey has surgery now. Surgery was a success. According to the Grizzlies, he's expected to make a full recovery. And now we have a timeline, at least from the Grizzlies standpoint. The Grizzlies said Zach Edey will be reevaluated in 4 months. So that's the timeline. It's not really a surprise to me based on what I've been hearing. And we'll talk about that more in the second segment. I kind of want to say we're going to get into some of the deets in terms of what this process will look like for Zach Edey going forward in second segment. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But 4-month reevaluation period, not really a huge surprise there, but it's going to be one that's challenging, for the Grizzlies. It's going to be challenging for Zach Edey. It's going to be challenging for the Grizzlies simply because of the fact that you got to figure out what the next 4 months plus will entail. You're talking about right now, this is June 11th. We're recording this episode. 4 months from now will be October the 11th. Exactly. Like if you want to go exactly 4 months from today. And the key to the wording at that point is he'll be reevaluated at that point. So you're talking about a situation where the Grizzlies will go back in and say, hey, now we can determine when he will be back to play. And then they will issue another update after that point that will say, hey, Zach Edey is expected to return at this date. So he's not expected to be back in 4 months. I want to make that clear, because if you saw that, you would think, oh, I thought he's expected to miss some time in the regular season. That's what, Shams Charania said. That's what, Damichael said. That's what some other reporters have been saying. And that's still the case. The regular season tends to start back end of October, right? I think last year was somewhere October 23rd, October 24th, something like that. So right now we're talking about exactly 4 months from now being October the 11th. So it's not a sense of, oh, he's going to return at that point. It's a sense of that's when we're going to see where he is in his return to play protocol, and they'll be confident enough to issue, an update. Quite frankly, And I don't want to scare anyone when I say this. It's just, it's a surgery. Like, I mean, uh, after surgeries, there's kind of, a surgery of this magnitude, there's kind of still like that unknown of when someone exactly is going to be back. So you're hopeful that that's on the shorter end, whereas Zach Edey, gets reevaluated in 4 months and they say, oh, couple weeks he's back. Just ramp him up, get him in some 5-on-5s, get him up and down a little bit, and boom, he's ready to go. But at the same time, there is the possibility that we're talking, I don't know, December or whatever the case may be. So we'll continue to monitor that situation, with Zach Edey, on that end. But the Grizzlies now, you have a clear idea. Okay, at least you have a better idea of what do we do going forward. Uh, Santi Aldama, to me, I've already said this, was already kind of like a priority to get re-signed. Jaren Jackson Jr., they're going to do everything in their power to secure him for the long term. You got Brandon Clark under contract as well. That's three bigs right there that we know the Grizzlies would like to play a lot of minutes. Three guys that can kind of occupy most of the time at the 4 and the 5. You can go small in stretches. Like they got other guys on the roster who could play the 4, and they move, a Santi, a Jaren, or BC at the 5 or whatever the case may be. So there are internal options to get through this phase of what it's going to look like without Zach Edey or whatever the case may be. But I know a lot of people, including myself, want to see the Grizzlies address this by adding someone from outside of the organization who can kind of help this team, whether it's through the draft, whether it's through free agency. Add someone who's physical, bring some size. I've talked about this. I know some people have mentioned, the name Clint Capella as of late. We'll talk more about him, in coming episodes, because he is a guy who I think, will be affordable in a way. Like he's not going to command some, big contract anymore, especially after the last couple seasons he's had, with the Hawks, with that situation basically just, sort of like, like just fading out over the last couple years. So there's an opportunity for a guy like that to be on a affordable contract or whatever the case may be. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll see if the Grizzlies feel the same way in terms of addressing it, or if they say, you know what, we're gonna trust what we got. You got Santi, you got BC, you got Jaren, you got Jay Huff. We're gonna trust that, and we're just gonna roll. We're gonna roll. That is very much a possibility as well. But what about the details of Zach Edey's injury? I talked to a doctor who's worked in the NBA a lot, and he gave me some very, very credible information on what the next months will look like for Zach Edey. We're going to talk about a little bit of that coming up here next on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we get to that, today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by WayFair. Look, there's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. So if you want to update your patio this season, Wayfair has made it so easy to turn it into a space that feels like yours, comfortable, stylish, and ready for summer. Wayfair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space: conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and yes, even the perfect string lights to set the vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without the resort price tag. Look, now, whether I'm hosting friends over or I'm just, unwinding with a book, got a little wine on the side, it genuinely feels like my own private retreat. The delivery was free, fast, and it's totally hassle free, even with the larger items. So don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That's WayFair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies, let's talk about the long-term ramifications of the Zach Edey injury. Zach Edey will be reevaluated in 4 months. We talked about that in the opening segment, but what does that next 4 months look like for him? What does that next 4 months look like for the Grizzlies? I talked to a doctor, and I also have a story that's going to come out on tomorrow. That's going to have a lot of details in the commercial appeal, so make sure you guys check that out as well. It'll be a little bit more detailed, but here's what we know. The first thing is, why surgery, right? Zach Edey sprained his ankle, so in theory, the Grizzlies could have said, "Oh, he'll let it heal," and he could have easily been back before the start of regular season. He could have been back way before, potentially. Potentially he could have been back for summer league. At this point, like summer league is still roughly 3 weeks to a month away. Like all of these things were still achievable. That's with a regular sprained ankle, but in the case of Zach Edey, the Grizzlies elected for surgery because they needed to restabilize it. And, I talked to a doctor about this whole process and whatnot. So basically what you had was Zach Edey, for, lack of better words. And I'm not no doctor. I mean, I could pretend to be Dr. Damichael Cole on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. That sounds good and all, add a couple little dollars to the paycheck. But at the end of the day, this was simply a situation where the ankle is looser than normal, which will tend to lead to more of these incidents going forward over the course of his career if they don't get in there and restabilize it. So his left ankle at this point was a little bit looser, so that was going to make him, subjected to more ankle sprains and, quite frankly, to easier ones. So the fact that he sprained his ankle in the offseason, training session, not an NBA game that was very high intensity, was kind of a sign that, okay, we got to get this addressed. So if you're looking for some case studies out there are players who have had similar surgery, similar instances in terms of where they have to go in and kind of like restabilize the ankle. Taj Gibson is a big that comes to mind, and another player who Grizzlies fans may remember decently well, since we're talking about Locked On Grizzlies, is Sam Merrill. Sam Merrill had this surgery and actually did a lot of his rehabilitation process in Memphis. He was eventually let go by Memphis during that time, but he rehabbed a lot in Memphis. And Sam Merrill, as we see now, is playing with the Cleveland Cavaliers, had a solid role on that team, and kind of has, career has moved forward. So by all indications, this is not a career-threatening injury, even for a guy of Zach Edey's size. Like, yes, those things always are factors. He's bigger and things like that. But, all indications that have been given to me, this is a situation where he's going to come back. He's expected, to be better. There will be an adjustment period. And that's why we say with the reevaluated in 4 months, you got to be careful with the definition there, because reevaluated in 4 months does not mean, oh, okay, so he'll be back, mid-October, late October, whatever the case may be. There's always a mental part of this. He's going to have to trust the ankle again. When I talked to the doc, he was talking about the fact that it's probably going to be 3 months or so, maybe even more, before he's doing real basketball activity. Like he'll get out there and, he'll get on a treadmill. He'll do some things like that. But it's going to be kind of a prolonged process in terms of getting Zach Edey back on the basketball floor, allowing him to get out there and trust that ankle. So in short, the Grizzlies are saying, look, we want to put this behind us. We don't want to be in a situation where another ankle sprain comes in 3 months, and then another ankle sprain comes behind that. And his ankle has increasingly got loose. So it's become easier for him to sprain that ankle. So that is something, that is kind of the Grizzlies and Zach Edey's team. They just said, it's time. it's time. It's time to just go ahead, get this thing out of the way, so it's not some long-term detriment to his career. So knowing that, the decision makes a lot of sense. Um, I don't know how it gets to the point where a guy like Zach Edey, who over the course of his collegiate career couldn't come off the floor for much. I mean, he barely came off the floor, at the collegiate level. Then he gets to the NBA, and the NBA is rigorous, man. It's a whole different level of playing basketball, just non-stop all the time. But he gets to the NBA, and then boom, you know, ankle injuries, summer league, ankle injury, second month into the season, really less than a month into his NBA career. And then season ends, boom, another ankle injury. So shout out to Zach Edey's team and the Grizzlies. They came together in the conversations. They said, look, his ankle is loose. It's more susceptible to even more ankle injuries going forward. And if he's spraining it in a random offseason session, like who knows what's going to happen, over the course of the regular season. So that's pretty much the situation. Remember, go back and look at what happened with Taj Gibson after his, Sam Merrill after his. The recovery process shouldn't be, too overbearing for Zach Edey. But we'll have more in the commercial appeal coming out on tomorrow morning about just the details and what that will look like for Zach Edey. So make sure you go check that out as well. But speaking of checking out, we've talked about, Jaren Jackson Jr. and Santi and Brandon Clark. They aren't the only bigs on this Grizzlies roster who could make an impact while Zach Edey is out. What about Jay Huff? We're going to talk about Jay Huff coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we talk about Jay Huff on today's episode, this episode is also brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you got to experience live. And this year's matchups are already delivering it. So if you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. That's right, even for the NBA finals that are currently going on right now. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off and will kill last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees. Gametime is a total game changer. Look, I was looking and I was like, man, Indiana isn't too far from Memphis. I can make that drive a little bit over 6 hours. Same thing for Oklahoma City. Like Memphis is roughly 6 hours or so from them. And I went to the University of Tennessee, so knocking out a 6 hour drive, I could do that. I can do that in a blink. So I was just on the app, scrolling them, looking at them like these deals are in some great sections. And with Game Time Guarantee, you're getting the best deal. If you find a better price in the same row and section, they'll credit you 110% of the difference. The NFL schedule release is also, it's here. It just dropped. And you better believe me, I'm already looking at my fall calendar. When can I go check out my Green Bay Packers? You got the Atlanta Falcons around here. When can I go to an NFL game? And Game Time makes scoring the NFL tickets just as easy. You'll find great seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed on the Game Time app. Make sure you go check that out now at Game Time. What about Jay Huff? We're talking about all these different bigs and what they can add to the Memphis Grizzlies. And I got Jay Huff's name just gets lost in the shuffle. And I get it. Jay Huff is kind of not the first name that's going to come to mind. But he is another 7-footer. He is a guy who played well, in stretches for the Grizzlies last season. We're talking about playing more than he has with any other NBA team before. Jay Huff was in his 4th season technically, right? This was his fourth NBA season. First season played 4 games with the Lakers. Second season played 7 games with the Washington Wizards. Third season played 20 NBA games with the Denver Nuggets. Fourth year, joins the Memphis Grizzlies. 64 games played, 2 starts, a little over, a little 11 and a half minutes. Basically, that's basically, I was in the rotation some, I was out of rotation some, those type of minutes. And you saw that. But we saw a guy who shot roughly, 51% from the field, 40% from three-point range. He still made over a three-pointer a game, made 1.3 three-pointers per game at a 40% clip. I mean, when he came in the game, he shot the ball extremely well, averaged around 6.9 points a game. He had, he had over 20 points, 22-point game, things like that. So what about Jay Huff? Why isn't his name being talked about more as an option? This one's easy for me. Let's get into the positives first. You got to start with the positives. No, we're gonna start with the negatives. We're gonna spin backwards. Since we're gonna end on the positives. With Jay Huff, if you want to start on the negative side, why he is not being, at least at this point, a bigger consideration for to step into that role without Zach Edey, because he pretty much is opposite of Zach Edey in a way, and it worked out. A lot of times in the regular season, like. There were certain games where you needed that, a big who was a little bit more mobile, also had the ability to, block some shots or whatever the case may be, but also had the ability to step out on the perimeter and knock down some shots and space the floor. That was Jay Huff. We saw early in the season, they were trying to make Zach Edey kind of that guy, and it was like, no, Zach Edey needs to be setting some screens on some dudes. He needs to be running to the rim. He needs to be ducking, getting easy touches, making easy baskets. And over the course of the season, you started to see more of that happen. Whereas with Jay Huff, a lot of his game is perimeter oriented. I mean, as we just said, you're talking about a guy who this season, shot 3.1 3-point attempts per game over the course of the season. And I mean, that was pretty much most of his shots. He averaged 4.8 field goal attempts per game. So more than half of his shots were 3-point shots. But here is the downside. And I mean, simply put, Jay Huff is just not a good rebounder. And when you talk about Jaren Jackson Jr., not a good rebounder. So you get the size, got a guy 7'1". You got a guy who averaged 2.7 blocks per 36 minutes with the Grizzlies this past season in Jay Huff. So you got to get some shot blocking. Jay Huff, Jaren Jackson Jr., block parties. You'll get some nice dunks from Jay Huff. The Huff stuff, as our guy Pete Pranica likes to call it. But at the same time, you're talking about a guy who averaged 6.2 rebounds per 36 minutes. 6.2 rebounds per 36 minutes. Not going to work. Not going to work. His rebounding would have to drastically improve, and that's never really been one of the bigger strengths of Jay Huff's game. So you talk about in a pinch, you talk about when you're going against teams who may not be great rebounding teams. Put Jaren out there, you put Jay Huff out there, and I think you can even play Jay Huff alongside of Brandon Clark, Santi. I mean, he's very position versatile because of his ability to shoot the basketball, to move at his size. You can pair him in any pairing with any of those guys. But we're talking about a guy who's going to come in and give you something different, a guy who's going to come in and be dominant on the glass and basically replace some of the things that Zach Edey does. At least on that end, that is not Jay Huff's strengths. Now, onto the positives. And the positives with Jay Huff are there. The offensive game is very plus. And one thing that we didn't see much of this season, now I go back and look, I'm like, man, I wish we would have seen just a little bit more of that. I wanted to see Jay Huff on the floor with Ja Morant. And, I know there's some rebounding things, and overall, Jay Huff's defense, didn't grade out as great, even with the shot blocking. But if you said the Grizzlies could kind of employ more of a 5-out lineup, like we've seen with the Oklahoma City Thunder, like we've seen with the Boston Celtics on the way to their championship run, if they could have done more of that, with Ja Morant getting downhill, with Ja Morant being one of the better paint scorers in the NBA, which, I mean, it's still in the bag. Like, he's still that. Uh, I wish we would have got to see that more. It seems like a natural fit. We saw Ja Morant really thrive when the Grizzlies put other three-point shooters on the floor. Santi Aldama, Luke Kennard, the list goes on. I mean, Desmond Bane is the prime example of that. But a big who can shoot 40+% from three-point range, it ain't scared to let it go. Because that's Jay Huff. One thing about it, when he came into the game, he was getting those three-pointers up, and he was making a lot of them. So, well within his right. I mean, that's one of those guys, when he shoots, it feels like it's going in more times than not. And that's one of the best things you could say, about a shooter, as a viewer. So I think, if you look at it like that, I wish you would have seen more of that pairing with Jay Huff. Jay Huff's ability, he could shoot the three-point ball. We talked about the 2.7 blocks per game. He moves very well. Talking about a guy who's 7'1", and he's very position versatile. Like, you can play him at the 5, you can play him at the 4. So even if the Grizzlies go out and get some other big who's going to be this guy's going to be very helpful on the glass, things like that, Jay Huff is someone I expect to, in the preseason, to get an opportunity. Expect him to get an opportunity. But let me know what you guys think as well. Is Jay Huff someone you say, oh, you know what? I want to give Jay Huff a chance. With other guys out, this is a chance for him to prove himself as well. You're like, nah, I mean, Jay Huff's a reserve for a reason. So let me know what you guys think as well about the opportunity here for Jay Huff, because he's on one of those controllable contracts. We talked about Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson signing that 4-year deal that's very team friendly. You got Jay Huff on one of those deals too. So he's probably going to be around for a while. But thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you guys again for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. So make sure you go check out that as well. And continue to tune in with us throughout this week. Me and Joe Mullinax will be back with you for tomorrow's episode. So the Dynamic Duo will be back together. Make sure you continue to tune in as we get closer to the NBA draft. We got to talk about some of these players that the Grizzlies have been bringing in for draft workouts as well. We haven't talked about that much, so we'll touch on that soon as well. But until next time, remember that Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Damichael Cole, and we'll see you on Locked On Grizzlies.